A bill that could ban TikTok from devices across America is one step closer to becoming reality. The House just passing the bill, and now it's on its way to the Senate. President Biden has said that he will sign that bill if it reaches his desk. NTD's Jack Bradley has more.
The House just passed a bipartisan bill that would force TikTok to divest from its Chinese parent company ByteDance or else be banned in U.S. app stores. Now the House voted 352 to 65 with one Democrat voting present, and that meets the 2/3 majority threshold to send it to the Senate now on an expedited basis. We heard some strong comments against the Chinese regime's control over user data, even by those who oppose the bill.
The data rights of Americans have got to be safe from foreign government manipulation.
I think there are serious national security concerns. I voted no. There are constitutional questions, I think, in the way it was crafted. There are timeline questions. 180 days to sell a company this size is very difficult.
We got a significant amount of information that they're clearly purposely playing with the data, playing with the content and targeting. For example, limiting speech when it comes to COVID, or limiting content with respect to Tiananmen Square or Hong Kong or Taiwan.
I share the data privacy concerns. I share the data concerns, but I think to rush this the way it's been rushed, and I also think the fact that we're not taking into consideration the amount of users is enormous.
The communists do not have a good, noble agenda for America, period. And TikTok is in the hands of the Chinese government.
We just don't want it in the hands of an entity that is clearly antagonistic to the interest of this country and clearly has no moral grounding.
Chinese law requires TikTok and other companies based in China to hand over user data to the regime. Now, since this bill came out, TikTok has been lobbying its 170 million users in the U.S. to contact their representatives and push back against this bill. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has not indicated how he'll vote. If the Senate passes this bill, President Biden has vowed to sign it. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
And joining us to discuss the national security risks TikTok does pose and their response to Congress's action is Steve Koonin, Special Advisor for China Tech Threat. Steve Koonin, thank you so much for joining.
Steve, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, Steve. The House of Representatives voting today 352 to 65 on legislation that could lead to a nationwide ban on TikTok if it does not separate from its parent company ByteDance, which it won't. TikTok blasted the House and said that it will turn its focus now onto the Senate. Lucky senators here. China's foreign ministry called it an act of bullying ahead of the vote. How much pressure would you say now is on Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell?
I'm not certain how much pressure would actually be on them, or perhaps I should say how much pressure should be on them, because I think the House realizes it's an obvious national security risk, and not hence the legislation. I find it ironic that China's foreign ministry would talk about that the United States is bullying. We're simply asking ByteDance to divest itself, or TikTok to divest itself of ByteDance, which is ultimately controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, we know they have the national laws, national intelligence laws, national security laws to essentially make ByteDance a tool of the Chinese Communist Party. But for the foreign minister to suggest that that's somehow bullying, when they're the one, when it's China that's actually, or the PLA that's out in the South China Sea using their Coast Guard and water cannons to stop the provisioning of Philippine military outposts, or ramming other nations, smaller nations' ships out there. I just find that somewhat ironic.
Could you sort of break it down and describe to us how TikTok actually poses this national security threat to the United States?
It's essentially half of America is getting their news from TikTok, which is ultimately beholden to the Chinese Communist Party through ByteDance. So the requirement to divest itself is, and I think, a very appropriate one. I don't think if it was any other country other than perhaps Russia, North Korea, Iran, that we would have problems with foreign ownership of of a social media platform like TikTok. But because it is China, I think it poses some serious national security risks. I mean, we've heard Chairman Gallagher refer to TikTok as digital fentanyl, in that it's rotting the minds of our youth, but it's not limited to America's youth. It's also Americans of any age. But there's also documents in the Chinese military where they've described how they can weaponize these social media platforms to increase anxiety and depression, and essentially it would be an intentional attack on their opponents' minds. There's key logging technologies or capability that would be at their disposal that would track a user the keystroke or every keystroke of the user. So potentially giving TikTok and ByteDance, and hence the Chinese Communist Party, access to the financial resources of all of its 170 million users. We hear Director Wray talking about the threat from the People's Republic of China, the government of the Chinese Communist Party controls that, so that they've embedded code into our infrastructure, our energy infrastructure, our ports, our airports, our telecommunications infrastructure. You can imagine the chaotic scenario that would ensue under those circumstances. Essentially, it would give China the ability to potentially take Taiwan without the United States even be able to come to their assistance. Or if they did, it would be with the forces in theater, which would be arguably relatively limited.
I want to get your thoughts on TikTok using the application to prompt millions of young Americans to lobby Congress on behalf of this situation, to highlight the way the app, does this ultimately highlight the way the app can influence our population for China's ends?
I think so, and Chairman Gallagher made that observation this weekend. I mean, it proves Congress's point, or at least the House's point up to this period, that TikTok can be used as a disinformation platform, because what TikTok was telling their users to do was misleading. Yeah. That it's not a ban, it's TikTok's choice. They have the option to divest themselves from ByteDance, and hence the Chinese Communist Party, or to be banned in the United States.
Steve Koonin, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
A United States Custom officer in his official capacity targeting an American performing arts company using CCP propaganda. The incident now leading to calls for a thorough investigation of possible Chinese infiltration into the United States government. NTD's Iris Tao has more from Chicago.
2 days ago at the O'Hare International Airport, performers of the U.S.-based Shengyun Performing Arts were coming back from a successful performance tour in Europe. But when they were going through the customs, an officer with a Chinese accent targeted the performers with the same hate propaganda that a Chinese Communist Party would use to target religious believers.
It just sounded like he was trying to put words into my mouth, like, are you being sponsored by Falun Gong? And so I just said, I don't think I have to answer that question, because we escaped from China, but this feels like as if we were being talked to by Chinese government. This is the US, like, I'm coming home, and this is something that should never happen in the U.S.
Many of Shengyun performers practice Falun Gong, a spiritual discipline severely persecuted in communist China. And the officer allegedly also told other officers that Shengyun dancers were illegal because of their faith. That questioning came despite all of the performers holding either U.S. citizenship or legal visas. In a statement, a CBP spokesperson says CBP strictly prohibits profiling on the basis of race or religion, and that CBP does not tolerate actions that are inconsistent with our core values. And Congressman Ryan Babin, meanwhile, calling for a thorough investigation, saying in a statement that we should never allow the PRC, one of the most repressive countries on the planet, to have influence over our federal government. Jason Anduzbo, an immigration lawyer, told NTD that the U.S. government needs to strengthen background checks of its officers.
As you can imagine, lots of examples where the government of China would do well for itself to plant people within the U.S. government, asylum officers, USCIS officers, any position within the government. The Falun Gong is one group that certainly has been targeted over the years within the United States, and it's important for the U.S. government to be aware about that and to try to actively prevent such threats.
Reporting in Chicago, Illinois, Iris Tao, NTD News.